Good afternoon, and welcome to Between the Pillars, the Fisher Library's video podcast series where we get to meet various staff. We introduce you to some of our collections here at the Fisher. I'm John Shoesmith, the Outreach Librarian at Fisher, and today is January 28th, 2022. As you can see, I'm at the Fisher today, but COVID protocols being what they are, my guest today, Eva Jurczyk, is having to do her bit remotely. So we'd hoped to do it in the library, but obviously that was not going to happen. So, but this the next best thing. So if you saw our episode 2 weeks ago, you'll know that we're doing a special themed month here on the podcast for January. We're calling it Fisher in Fiction. So we started 2 weeks ago with Toronto writer Lindsay Ziervogel and highlighted her book, Letters to Amelia, whose main character worked as a library tech at Fisher. Today, we're focusing in on another Toronto writer. I apologize for any noise that's happening here. My University of Toronto Library's colleague Eva Jurczyk, and her first novel, hot off the presses, just released this week, Department of Rare Books and Special Collections. So welcome, Eva. It's great to have you on the podcast. So now while Eva is currently working in the Collection Development Department at UTL, we first met almost a decade ago, and I looked it up on LinkedIn actually, and you were working here back in 2011, is that right?
Yeah, I can't believe it's been 10 years, but it was while I was a graduate student at the iSchool. And so I guess I'm that old now, but it was 10 years ago.
One of the main, it's funny because we've had so many students come through Fisher in the 15, 16 years I've been here. And you also remember bits and pieces of a certain them. One thing I remember about Eva is that you were the first person that ever mentioned Netflix to me. And the fact that I should subscribe to Netflix. And at the time I thought, I don't know, that's not really my thing. And I think my claim—
Turns out I was right.
You were right. You were dead right. And the thing that I think I left with the legacy with you is that I remember you didn't like basketball at the time, and you didn't like the Toronto. You weren't interested in basketball, and now you've since become a big Toronto Raptors fan. So
that's true.
I sort of lay claim to that one.
Yeah, I was right about Netflix. You were definitely right about the Raptors.
There you go. So anyway, so what we're going to do on this episode is we're going to talk a bit about the novel, the Department of Rare Books and Special Collections. But we're also going to go back in time when Eva was here a decade ago, when she was the gifts coordinator. And we're going to look at some of the material that she handled while she was a student here at the Fisher Library. So let's first actually, Eva, let's talk about the book.
Sure.
And actually, one thing I'm curious about, which I think I saw, it must have been about a year or so ago that you first announced that your manuscript had been bought by a publisher. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, I didn't know if Eva wrote. So when you were at Fisher, 10 years ago, were you writing fiction at the time then as well?
No, I wasn't writing fiction at the time. I was, like most writers, I wanted to be a writer from the time that I was a little kid. But that just was never a very practical career choice. So I tried some other things. I went to library school, and it was right when I graduated from library school. So it would have been after I left the Fisher. I decided that, if I'm ever going to do this in my life, then I have to actually start doing this. So it was right when I graduated. I started working on something. I have another novel, a desk drawer novel, as failed writers, call it, that never really went anywhere. And I'm not good about writing things while I'm in them. So I needed a little distance from the place. Right. So it was probably 5 years or so after I left the Fisher that I started working on this book. But yeah, that I didn't really start writing fiction or writing anything at all until after I graduated from library school.
So is there anything in particular about this department that kind of captured your imagination 5 years after you had left the department?
Yeah, well, I don't think it just captures my imaginations. I think that people or readers in general are fascinated by that type of place. I mean, John, look behind you.
That's true.
Yeah, how could you not be fascinated about that? It's beautiful and interesting, and it's filled with interesting and beautiful things, and it's filled with interesting people who care so deeply about those collections. It has the spooky basements that I've spoken about in just about every interview that I've done, because I was captivated by those, how you could turn a corner and just run into something exceptional. Everything about it was interesting, and those memories really stayed with me. And so when I thought about writing, I knew that I wanted to write about it as a place because it was just so captivating. And setting a mystery there just seemed to make sense, because the thing about my desk drawer novel that nobody did anything with is that it didn't have much of a plot.
Right.
So to give my interesting characters and something to do in that beautiful setting, a mystery just seemed to make sense.
So tell us a bit about the novel then. I mean, don't give away any of the spoilers because it is a mystery, but maybe just give us a quick synopsis of what it's all about.
Yeah, sure. So there's a character, Lisa Weiss, who's sort of being second in command at this rare books library. That's not the Fisher. It's a Toronto set, a rare books library, but it's never named. So she's been second in command for a long time, when she's sort of really suddenly thrust into the leadership position at this library. And things immediately start to go wrong. First, a priceless manuscript goes missing, then one of the librarians does. And as she's trying to figure out what's going on, she's told again and again to just, not contact the police, to not ruffle feathers, just to keep the donors happy and keep the doors open. And she starts to discover that things in the place aren't as they seem. So she sort of steps into herself as a leader, as she begins to figure out what's been going on at this library.
Do you have the book with you? Maybe you can read a little excerpt. Perfect. Maybe just read a couple of minutes for us.
Sure. I've never had to do this before, so I'm really nervous. But okay, let's try it out. So this is from close to the beginning of the book. That first morning, in the swampy heat of early September, exactly 3 minutes after Garber exited the library, and just as Dan Haberer was about to hit play on the secondhand Discman that he lorded over adherents to more convenient forms of technology, Liesl took him by the arm and asked him to retrieve the Peshawar manuscript. As an afterthought, she told him to bring a couple of book trucks to Christopher's office to gather various scattered volumes for reshelving. Dan made an offended display of removing his headphones. Liesl waited until they were all the way off, wrapped in their cord, placed gingerly upon the Discman, and the middle-aged man, clad in head-to-toe denim, was face-to-face with her before repeating her request. While waiting for the headphones and listening to Dan's vague grumbles about book request slips and policies and work he had planned for the morning, Liesl had plenty of time to reflect on how unusual Dan's heavy denim and combat boot ensemble was in the academic library. Corduroy slacks stretched over thighs, well-polished loafers concealing collapsed arches, a short-sleeved polo on a hot day occasionally. These were the uniforms for their battalion. To be confronted with the workman's ensemble over Dan's slender frame as he ambled, for Dan always ambled, towards the elevator to get the Peshawar for her and the donors was a contradiction so acute that Liesl never quite trusted her eyes. It was the too obvious choice, the Peshawar, for the show and tell with the money. She could have been creative, could have asked some of the library's people, could have phoned up a dealer for a one-day loaner. But Liesl wasn't up on doing things just for the sake of appearances on her very first day of the #1 job. Besides, she assumed that this accumulation of money-loving people would appreciate being in close proximity with these pages that had contributed to the invention of modern mathematics. You can't have a bank balance with 8 zeros unless someone first invents the zero.
That's great.
That's my couple minutes.
Perfect. Now, one of we don't have a Peshawar manuscript, as far as I know.
There's just the one. Yeah.
But the book does center around the theft of a recent purchase they had made. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about the book. The book that is stolen.
Yeah. So the thing that really kicks off the action in the book is Liesl shows up on that first day of work, and the library has just purchased a Plantin Polyglot Bible. So this is a real manuscript that exists. It was printed in Antwerp. And the printer, Christopher Plantin, he was suspected to be this Protestant sympathizer. So to prove his loyalty to the Catholic Church, he offered to print this Bible for the King of Spain. So the library's just acquired one. I think that they paid $500,000 for it. I can't remember exactly how much. And it's supposed to be in the safe because they're still waiting for it to be insured. And on that first day, she goes to open the safe and the Bible's not there. And so the hunting for this, the Plantin Polyglot Bible, is really what kicks off the action in the story.
So let's show something here with our document camera. And what do we have here but a Plantin Bible?
It's exciting to see this.
Which you didn't know we had, actually. Is that right?
No, I didn't. I mean, how irresponsible of me to not have just looked in the library catalog, as I tell people to do every day. Just look it up in the library catalog. But no, I didn't know. It just so happened that there was one up for auction at roughly the time that I was writing this book. So it was based on that. And it turns out that the library has its own lovely example.
We don't have it. We don't have the first volume of it. It's an
Mhm.
8-volume set, so it's missing, I believe, the first volume and one other volume. I can't remember which one now. We didn't pay $500,000 for this because I've actually never pulled this book out myself. I think it was part of an exhibition a few years ago. So I've actually never handled this book. One of the great things about doing these podcasts, I get to handle things that I've never touched before. And the great thing about this, when I pulled it out, is I've noticed the book plate. It's actually a gift book plate, dated 1892, and it's from the library in Dresden. And so I'm guessing, and I think I'm making a very strong, educated guess, that this is one of the books that was donated after the fire, the University of Toronto fire in 1890, since they did try to solicit books from around the world. And there was all kinds of donations came in of various books. Unfortunately, we never recovered our Audubon, but hopefully maybe one day. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about this book and kind of why you decided this particular book. Was it just because you saw it in an auction catalog and thought that would be a good book to focus the narrative around?
Yeah, well, I saw it in an auction catalog, and so I got to see how exceptional it was. So you can see that, in the Old Testament, it has the Hebrew with Latin translation, as well as the Greek, and then it has the Aramaic, which is paraphrased into Latin in the New Testament.
So this is the new.
Yeah, so in the New Testament, you have the original Greek, you have Hebrew translation, you have Syriac translation, you have the Latin. And it's really, this thing is a masterpiece. It took him years to print, took nearly 40 printers to complete. When he said that he was going to do this for King Philip was down for it, but then he didn't offer any financial support. So the project almost bankrupted Plantin. And then what's really exceptional about the fact that we own one of these is that there's just not very many of them left, because after all this work, most or many of the original 1,200 copies that were printed were lost in a shipwreck in 1572.
Right.
So it is really a special and rare piece. So it was something that I knew I could spend a lot of time with in writing, that I was excited to spend a lot of time with. And how could I not? This is John showing you the pages. It really is an exceptional piece of work.
So next time when we actually reopen again, I hope you're going to come and visit the actual, the book that the narrative is centered around.
I would love to. One of the things when we were planning to do this in person, I was so excited to get to see some of the collections, because even though we work so close to each other, I just hardly ever go down there. So yeah, I'll definitely come and give this a visit. Okay, when things are open again.
So this is the Bible we wanted to sort of showcase that the novel centers around. But what I want to do next, I want to transition really to some of the material that you handled as a student. So let me just remove this. This is a very large and heavy book. This is shelved flat in case anyone. So let's move these. Okay, so let's start with something that is much smaller by comparison.
Yes.
So let me zoom in on this. So let me just open this to the title page. Actually, Mary Williamson is the donor of this particular book. And what can you tell us about this?
So this is great. So first, I should shout out the donor, because my job at the Fisher was when the donations came in, listing the works and things like that. So I remember Mary Williamson, who was a librarian for, I think, York University, but was also a scholar of food. And so she came in with a donation of a few books. I remember them being, the top shelf of a book truck of old cookbooks. And this, Cook Not Mad, or Rational Cookery, is the first cookbook ever printed in Canada. So you can see that it was printed in Kingston. I can't remember the year, John, and I can't quite see down at the bottom. 1831. So Canada's first cookbook. And what I love about this is, in 1831, we don't have a lot of publications in Canada that were put out by women. And while this isn't attributed to anyone, I don't think there's an author listed. And most of the things in there are, pretty work a day, like how much salt you need to preserve 15 kilos of bison. Right. If you're
this page here is to salt pork, to roast beef, and it's a roast lamb recipe as well. So
yeah, some of the things I love when you look through is just the volumes of stuff, like how much meat they're telling you to make at once. It's really something.
Right.
But it does go on and have sort of tips for the homemaker, and you do get a little bit of the personality of the person or people who put this together. So I love it as a little bit of cultural history, as a bit of, you know, women's history in Canada, and just what a special little piece
And
that was brought in.
yeah, and Mary is a great donor for us. She's contributed to such a, to the cookery collection as a whole. So, and we had an exhibition on a lot of this material a number of years ago by our colleague Liz Rodolfo. So that's one. I'm just going to pull these out and
Great.
see if Eva remembers some of these things. What do you remember about this?
So if you look closely, you might recognize the name Chris Plummer. So this is really cool. So this is a program for the Niagara Falls, Ontario Summer Theatre Festival in 1952, when a hotshot young actor named Chris Plummer starred alongside some others. Yeah, alongside William Hutt in this production. So how cool is that? And, you know, to me, this is such an important piece of history, and it really highlights the importance of the work that the library does. You know, this is ephemera. This is something that, you know, an ordinary person, it's a single sheet of paper, would pick up and toss away. But we're learning about the life of the donor, the person who went to this festival and thought to keep this. We're learning about Christopher Plummer. You know, he's Captain of Von Trapp to us. Or, you know, the bad guy from the 25th Hour.
Right.
But here you can really understand his beginnings in this tiny theater festival, and you're learning about Canadian theater and the vibrancy of these little festivals and why it's so important that they continue.
Who is the donor?
No, I don't. So the donation of this stuff was really interesting. I don't think the Canadian theater programs are all from one donor. You know, we still collect them, as you were saying before. Yep. I just remember coming to work and they were in shopping bags. No frill shopping bags, to those of you who are watching who are locals, you know, the bright yellow and black shopping bags. And there were so many of them that I remember that I couldn't even work on them in the workroom. I had to take these theater programs to some other room in the library, or maybe up to the Department of East Asian Studies, somewhere where they had lots of tables. So I got 6 or 7 huge tables, and I just had to dump out these bags and begin to sort these things out by theater company and by date before we could list them. And in doing that, you know, you come across little treasures like this, which is so exciting.
Well, because I remember when I was looking through the theater programs for something. I can't remember something specific. It was a reference question or something, and it came across an early one from Stratford with, you know, William Shatner, for example, in the cast.
Oh, cool.
In a very, very small role. You know, he was basically, you know, the 8th or 9th person listed in the program itself. So, but yeah, because a lot of these just don't survive, and so it's great when we have we've got a very strong theater program collection here at the library. And as I said, it is something we continue to collect. When I go to see a play or go see an opera, I just take the program with me, bring it to work, and stick it in our sorting room, and hopefully it'll get listed one day. So do you remember how many of those programs you did, those theater programs?
No, I mean, I don't remember at all. I looked at the finding aid before we had this conversation to look, and I don't even think you can get a good sense of them. Like I said, I remember there being 6 or 7 huge tables in a pretty large room, and stacks on stacks of those.
Okay, let's just go out of it. Now, what is this we're looking at?
Oh, this is one of my favorite things. This is one of the most beautiful things I remember seeing. This was another gift, a donation of a donor named George Grant, and it was delivered in a gift bag. So sort of in a gift bag sitting on my desk. So I didn't know what to expect, didn't think much of it. And it was a gift, all of the works of George Barbier, who was a French illustrator and eventually a costume designer. And he's really one of the key artists of the Art Deco movement. And I think to most people, you know his style, even if you don't know his name. Like, these pictures conjure something for you. And I mean, if you look at this beautiful donation, the beautiful work. So I think that this particular item is showing the costumes for a production of Casanova. Is that right, John?
Yep.
And I mean, so just imagine seeing, you know, a couple of dozen of works just like this one show up on your desk. It's one of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen, just as an object. And it just so happened that the Fisher was planning to do an exhibition on the works of George Barbier in partnership with the ROM. And that happened, I think, 18 months later. So if you're interested in more about this artist, you can look up the Fisher's exhibition catalog.
Which actually, I think that one might even be online. If you check our website, that exhibition catalog, it might be online. So definitely.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, just to get this material and to be able to see these. And what was really cool was that the donor had kept a lot of his receipts or correspondence over the years. And this collection had really been a labor of love. It looked like he had collected this material through his whole life, because you had receipts, from the 70s and things like that. And just little slips of paper from maybe some bookseller in France where he had had the material shipped over. And it seemed like it was a really focused collection. Like, this is what he collected. This is the material that he wanted. And then he donated it to the library, and how lucky we are to have this material in our collection.
And it kind of just, even just the three things we've shown, it kind of shows the depth and breadth as a student, that suddenly the work you're being asked to handle and list.
Yeah. So, I mean, people say, how important was that job in your life? I mean, imagine being this lucky to come to work and seeing something like this on your desk. It's unbelievable.
So we got just two more things to show. Keep the flyer there. Now, what do you remember about this collection?
So this was a really cool collection. Again, a donation, a gift of somebody named Carl Alexander. And the Fisher Library is very lucky in that it has really strong ties to the Czech community in Canada. Particularly, there was a long-time librarian who worked there named Luba Frostaki, and I think that she really nurtured those relationships. And so this was a collection of these beautiful volumes that I think that they had all been made by hand. There were these I mean, just look at that. It's these unbelievable just both the illustrations and the bindings of these works were singular pieces of art. I think that John, did Ksenia do an exhibition on these?
She's used some of these, yes, for one of her exhibitions.
Yeah. So I think one of our colleagues used some of these in an exhibition. And I mean, again, just stunningly beautiful work. I think a lot of people are actually quite familiar with graphic design in that part of Europe, mostly through movie posters, Czech and Polish movie posters, that sort of thing are quite popular, but you might not know about the book arts. And seeing these pieces, these physical objects. Like I said, both the bindings and the designs of the works themselves are really just distinctive and like nothing I'd ever handled in my life. And yeah, look at that book plate is.
I know, it's beautifully bound. This.
Yeah, and all done by hand, and really it was a donation. All the materials in that donation of Carl Alexander, they were all quite different from each other, right, but all had this same nature. And so getting to learn about the book arts tradition was really something special.
I'm curious then, did any of the materials that you handled or work on, did they make their way into the novel at all? Because I know you do mention some some items that are in the Fisher, whether it's a Vesalius. I mean, so I'm just wondering if any of the material that you handled personally would have ended up in the novel.
I don't think it did. I think the Vesalius is the most famous of the library's works that wound up in the novel. I mean, I guess the Plantin did too. I just stupidly didn't know that it was actually in the collection. But but one of the most fun things about writing the book was getting to research these materials from library collections everywhere and bring them in. And one of the reasons that I don't name the library is because I wanted to be able to take liberties and sort of cherry pick from lots of different collections and spend time with different works and get to learn about them.
Was it a nice kind of, was a nostalgic trip back for you to sort of write about the time and the place again, about the building?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting to write about those basements that I always loved so much absolutely was nostalgic and wonderful, and getting to sort of conjure the images of what that library would look like was really cool. I would recommend that to everyone. Think back about a job that you've really loved and maybe weave details of it into a piece of fiction. It's really great to get to go back to that time.
Well, I think you've done the Fisher proud, I think. So again, Eva's book, Department of Rare Books and Special Collections, which is, I assume available at most independent bookstores here in
yeah
across Canada.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, Queen Books is the one that I always recommend because it's my local independent bookstore. But yeah, check it out at your local independent bookstore.
are you working on something else?
I am, yeah. I am actually. My agent has it already, so we're waiting and seeing what happens with that. And that is one that's actually set in a different realm. It's set back in Eastern Europe in the 80s. So we'll see what happens with that, and hopefully that will exist somewhere in the world sometime soon.
Great. Well, thank you, Eva. This has been really wonderful. It's been great to sort of look at these materials. As I said, it's always great for me to pull things out that I've never seen before or handled before. So it's been great. Hopefully, when COVID times are ending, we can finally get together. We can come back to the library, look at some of this material again, especially the Plantin Bible. So so thanks again. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. The plan is actually to do another themed month. And this time we're going to do what we're calling our Special Collections Friends. So stay tuned. Exactly. So stay tuned for in 2 weeks' time when you'll get to meet one of our friends. So again, Eva, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
That's great. And hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time.